Please. Yeah.
I hope not. I have to repeat all over again when it goes live. I'm so sorry for this technical hiccup. Good afternoon again. Let me start with some few remarks. It was an independent country from time immemorial until the middle of 20th century. Tibet was invaded and is illegal by the Communist Chinese regime since the fall of 1949 to date. Tibet was forcibly annexed to China through the so-called 17-point peace agreement signed under duress on 23 May 1951. I'm sure Dr. Sengay will expand on this. The rise of China in economic terms, we have seen it for the past 3 decades, and with its rise in commercial and economic power, we have seen the aggressive political flexing of its power in all parts of China, in all parts of the world. Many countries, especially Southeast Asia and countries in the whole of African continent, did not have much choice except to adhere to the demands of Communist China. The Communist China's leadership have brought the leaders of African countries to gain unfettered access to their natural resources which were shipped to China. In the liberal and democratic Western world, the view was taken in such a way that with economic progression in China, it will result in political liberalization. This theory is now shattered. China wants to become a supreme superpower with Chinese characteristics, with no human rights, no religious freedom, one-party dictatorship, and this is a direct challenge to the Western democratic and liberal values. Since the outbreak of the Wuhan-originated COVID-19, the subsequent pandemic throughout the world, when all countries are busy dealing with the COVID-19 deaths and trying to control and manage the pandemic, China seems to have done many aggressive statecrafts, which has resulted in condemnation from almost all parts of the world. In addition to the anger of the international community on the spread of the COVID-19 pandemics, China angered India by border incursion in Ladakh and border disputes with Bhutan. Communist China has passed the new Hong Kong security law with effect from 1st of July 2020. Hong Kong's judiciary independence has no meaning, and consequently the concept of one country, two systems remains only in paper. To eliminate this, our listeners and viewers, I'm delighted to have the pleasure of an extraordinary distinguished and expert speakers to discuss one of the most challenging things the world is facing now. Before I introduce the speaker, let me say that this event is recorded and broadcast, and we will be taking questions from our viewers, and please put the questions in the comment section of the Facebook. We have 4 distinguished speakers. I will introduce each speaker first and then let him have his speech, and then I will introduce the speaker in that fashion. So the first speaker we have is Dr. Lobsang Sengay. Dr. Lobsang Sengay was born and brought up in a Tibetan refugee settlement near Darjeeling in India. From his humble beginning in life, he has achieved much for him and for his people. Dr. Lobsang Sengay is the president of the Central Tibetan Administration since 2011. After the announcement of the full retirement of His Holiness the Dalai Lama as the temporal leader of Tibet, Dr. Sangay holds the title of Sikyong, meaning political leader of Tibet. Before joining the Central Tibetan Administration, he worked at the Harvard University as a senior research fellow after completing his master's in the Harvard Law School. Dr. Sengay is an expert on international human rights law, democratic constitutionalism, conflict resolution. In 2007, he was elected as one of the 24 young leaders in Asia. So, let me welcome our President, Dr. Lobsang Sengay. Please.
Very much for your kind introduction, and it's an honor to be on panel with Honorable Tom Tugendhat and Tim Loughton, our friend, and Kerry Brown, all the way in London. So I just want to say hello from Dharamsala, and it's a great privilege to share the panel with you all. Now, if I go back to history, then I think it's like 2,000 years of history in 7 or 8 minutes is difficult to cover. But let me make one point very clear, that Tibet was an independent country and was recognized by none other than China. In 821-23 treaty signed between China and Tibet said that Tibetans will be happy in the great land of Tibet, Chinese will be happy in the great land of China, signed by representative of the Chinese government and representative of Tibet. And this treaty was, placed in China and at the border of China and in Lhasa in the form of stone pillars. So if you go to Lhasa, even today, you will see the stone pillar, which clearly says that Tibet was an independent country and China recognized that. Now, there are so many other agreements and treaties. I will not dwell on that, but I'll come forward to 1914. The similar convention was signed between Tibet and British India. At that time, Tibet was represented by Longchen Chatra, Prime Minister of Tibet, and British India was represented by Sir McMahon. And at that time, the McMahon line was drawn as the boundary between India and Tibet, affecting the eastern sector of India and Tibet, which is primarily Arunachal Pradesh and touching Bhutan. So again, we showed that Tibet had the capacity to enter into a treaty or agreement with different countries, including with British India. Now, after 1914, when Communist Party was first established, they promised Tibetans right to self-determination in their common document of 1932. Now, after Communist Party established its control over PRC in 1949, again, the rights of minorities, particularly Tibetans, were enshrined in the Constitution. And in 1951, a 17-point agreement was signed, as referred to by Sonam Parsila. In the 17-point agreement, which was essentially a one country, two system, or the original one country, two system, Tibetan representative went to Beijing with the intention that some kind of agreement will be signed as equal partners or stakeholders between China and Tibet. But the way the delegate members were treated, they were affected. So even though they had the original seal that they brought from Lhasa, the capital city, and authorized to sign an agreement, the Tibetan delegation said, we don't have our seal, we have no authority to enter into an agreement. And essentially, the 17-point agreement was forced on Tibetans. So it was signed under duress. However, the 17-point agreement, Article 3 said that regional autonomy to the Tibetan people will be provided. Article 4 said the status and authority of the Dalai Lama will remain the same. And thereby Article 7 and Article 9 says the Tibetan language, will be encouraged. And also, any kind of changes in religious belief will not be introduced without consulting the Tibetan people, so and so forth. But from 1951 to 1959, one step after another, the provisions were violated, and all the promises made to Tibetans, even though it was under duress, were denied. And in 1954, His Holiness Dalai Lama went to Beijing and spent 11 months, met with Chou En-lai, met with Mao Zedong and other leaders, trying to persuade them to grant them the autonomy as promised. But it was pretty clear that the Chinese government intention was to deny the very autonomy that was promised. So at the end of the meeting, at the end of His Holiness Dalai Lama's stay in Beijing, finally he met Mao Zedong, and Mao Zedong, till that time, His Holiness kind of grew affection towards Mao Zedong and had some respect for him. But at the end, he whispered to his ear that religion is poison. That shocked His Holiness Dalai Lama, and upon his return to Lhasa, he sensed that it is not going to go well. And in 1956, His Holiness went to India to attend the 2500th anniversary of Buddha Purnima, or Buddha's death and birth anniversary. And at that time, His Holiness wanted to stay in India. But Chinese Prime Minister Chou En-lai visited India 3 times and spent several weeks persuading the Indian government at that time, particularly Indian Prime Minister Nehru, to send His Holiness Dalai Lama back to Tibet. Then again, Chou En-lai promised to Nehru that the autonomy that was promised in the 17-point agreement will be implemented. Nothing will happen to His Holiness. There will be no violence at all. So with that assurance, again, His Holiness Dalai Lama, even though he was in India, he returned to Tibet. But in 1959, as we all know, violence ensued. From the month of March to September of 1959 alone, 87,000 Tibetans were killed. The point is, basic law, one country, two system that was promised to Hong Kong, now you see unraveling in Hong Kong, was already promised to Tibet, and all the promises that Chinese government made to Tibetans were broken. So this is, in a sense, our experience. Now, let me give you another example. So the Chinese government at that time promised Tibetans peace and prosperity, and promised to build a road connecting China to Tibet. So Tibetans were, really grateful that the Chinese government is building a road connecting China to Tibet, which will bring prosperity to Tibetans, which will bring, a benefit to Tibetans. That's what Tibetans believe. And Tibetans were paid in silver coins and gold coins. Now Tibetans start singing, our parents and grandparents. Like Communist Party is like a generous parents. They shower you with gold to provide labor. But once the road was completed, instead of prosperity, they brought trucks, they brought guns, they brought tanks, and then that's how Tibet was occupied. Now, in this dual process of first providing a law and the promises that regional autonomy will be guaranteed to Tibetans, and building a road in the name of prosperity, both were dashed. In the process, they were also doing something else, elite co-optation. Number one, how to bribe and co-opt politicians, how to bribe business people and give them some benefits and co-opt them, how to buy intellectuals, how to buy religious leaders, persuade them, pressure them, buy them off. So by the time Chinese army was in Tibet, so there was a debate within the elite circle as to whether the Chinese presence in Tibet is beneficial to Tibet or not. And there was some section in the elite who said it could be beneficial, perhaps we should work with the Chinese government. In a sense, they have done the elite cooptation. So what you see in Hong Kong also something similar, elite cooptation. So I'm not surprised. I've been to many capitals around the world, from foreign ministers to finance ministers of different countries. After they finish their term, they work as a consultant, a high-paying consultant to the Chinese government or Chinese companies, or the Chinese conglomerate. So this is what you see all over the world, and essentially the blueprint that was used in Tibet is being used in Hong Kong and rest of the world by China. So at the moment, what's happening? Now, in the 17-point agreement, we were promised Tibetan language to be used, and the Chinese constitution also says Tibetan language should not only be used but encouraged. Rather, at the university level, medium of instruction is Chinese. At the high school level and middle school level, medium of instruction is Chinese, not Tibetan language. So cultural assimilation of the Tibetan people is going on. Now, religious beliefs were protected in the 17-point agreement. Now, if you go to Tibet, at least in the 1950s and 60s, 98% of monasteries and nunneries were destroyed. 99% of monks and nuns were disrobed. Even now, just a few years ago, Serta Monastery with 20,000 monks and nuns was demolished to half. Yachengar with 5,000 to 6,000 nuns. If you Google Yachengar, you will see a photograph of Yachengar. Half of the nunnery is gone. Some nuns also committed suicide. Now the human rights violation that is taking place now has forced 154 Tibetans to commit self-immolation, burn themselves. And many of them are monks, nuns, nomads, farmers, young and old. So the repression in Tibet is so severe. So from the promises that they made to us in 1951 and the reality that you see in Tibet is totally different. So our experience, has been tragic. And what you see in Hong Kong, the unfolding in Hong Kong, and recently I was interviewed by media and I said, Hong Kong is going to be Tibet number 2. And so it's unfortunate. I know our solidarity lies with people in Hong Kong because we do believe democracy is universal, human rights is universal, and it ought to be respected by the Chinese government, and people in Hong Kong deserves our solidarity and deserves their human rights. So with that, I want to conclude by quickly saying one thing. During the 13th Dalai Lama's time, he was quite a reformist. He sent several students to UK to learn English language and get exposure to modern education. And also, a trade delegation was sent to UK when Tibet was independent. And when, after the Second World War, the congratulatory delegation of the government of Tibet was sent to Delhi and met with the British representative in Delhi to congratulate the British government. And there are other details regarding British-Tibet relationship, and I will leave it to Tim and Kerry Brown to dwell on those, and then we get a holistic picture of a Tibet experience, which is very, very relevant to the situation in Hong Kong. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to listening to a great panelist now.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Sengay. It's a comprehensive description of what has gone on in the Tibetan scene for the past 70 years. And now I would like to invite Colonel Tom Tugendhat, a member of the Conservative Party and a chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee since 2017, He's one of the youngest person to hold this position. We are very, very lucky and delighted to have this conference in the presence of Mr. Tugendhat, because with his chairmanship, there is much, and we hope there will be more interaction, as his vision of China is quite different from what we have experienced in the past. During his chairmanship, he has focused on certain very important policy priorities for the British government apart from Brexit. Under his chairmanship, he has made inquiries covering the implication of China's growing role in the international system, the UK's relationship with India, and the responsibility of protect. He is also a founding member of the China Research Group in the UK Conservative Party, looking to reset UK's relationship with China. So I would like to invite Mr. Tom Tugendhat to dwell on how the UK government's position and challenges that the government faces in this really special time. Thank you. Mr. Tugendhat, your turn.
Good afternoon. Is this broadcasting? Are you all right?
Yes.
Good. Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Sik Yong. It was a huge privilege to listen to the leader speaking just before, and to hear the perspective of somebody who has been faced with such difficulties now for so many years. I thought I would talk a little bit about the changing relationship between the United Kingdom and China in recent years, because I'm not an expert on Tibet, and I won't be speaking in front of such experts who could speak so much better than I could. What I would highlight is that the relationship since General Secretary Xi took over a few years ago in 2012 has become significantly worse than it was before. The rise of a form of Leninist nationalism in a much clearer form of language than we have seen for a long time has changed the nature of the relationship and has made it harder and harder for countries like the UK, although the UK is not alone, to deal with the way that the Communist Party of China is behaving. Now, as far as the UK is concerned, there are very obvious touchstones. The most obvious, of course, is Hong Kong, to whom we have remaining obligations under the Sino-British Joint Declaration, and that we have recognised in the granting of permits, as it were, to the changing the nature of the British national overseas status to allow people to reside in the UK, and recognising properly, as many of us have argued, that British nationals overseas are, after all, British nationals and should have the ability to reside in the UK. And for those of us who didn't vote for Brexit and in many ways still regret the departure from the European Union, this is an important statement as well about the internationalism of the United Kingdom. And so I think it's a positive statement about the connection between Britain and the Chinese people, but I think it also recognises the difficulty that we have with the communist government. Now, we've seen in the UK as well other issues that have raised the profile, raised concerns amongst the Foreign Affairs Committee. The first, of course, is the nature of our university education and the attempts to influence that we've seen and heard of in evidence from many different witnesses in the UK. And though various elements of the Chinese embassy in London have denied it, sadly we've seen all too frequently the evidence of different protests being organised and pressure being put on individual students or indeed on their parents in mainland China. And this is causing huge concerns amongst many independent academics. Sadly, some academics have decided that it is easier to take the Beijing shilling than it is to raise concerns, and we're already seeing different elements where some courses are becoming propaganda rather than academic study, and that's a great sadness. Because it undermines not only the ability to study certain areas, but it actually also undermines the independence and the academic excellence in some of our finest institutions. So those are the areas that we're seeing immediately, and the latest changes we're seeing in the UK, I would argue, are a reaction to them. So the decision over Huawei does not come out of the blue. It comes out of the recognition that actually the relationship between our countries has changed, and the threats and attempts to influence that we've seen from Beijing have caused people to be increasingly concerned about the presence of dominating technology in our systems and the inability later to replace or remove it should we feel that that dependence is too great. So I think those are the essential points I would like to cover, but I'm now keen to listen to others and hear what others have to say.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you so much. It's wonderful that you gave your time, and I'm conscious of your time limit here. We will do our best to keep you as long as possible here. So I would like to introduce our third panelist, who is Right Honourable Tim Loughton, member of the UK Parliament for East Worthing and Shoreham. Tim has been a great supporter of Tibet, very happy to announce here, and he is the chair of the All Party Parliamentary Group for Tibet for many years, and his team's work in the Parliament and the representation for Tibet has been highly valued in Foreign Office for the representations he made to the UK government. And recently, Tim has introduced the Tibet Access, Reciprocal Access Bill in the Commons, very challenging and very forceful, a huge signal to the Beijing government, the intentions of the UK Parliament. So I would like to request Tim to invite him to say something, how things are going with this bill and all the other things with the background information on it. Thank you, Tim.
So, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, thank you.
Excellency Dr. Sangay, it's a pleasure to share a platform with you again, and with the other colleagues on the panel. I'm delighted to be part of this event today. I won't repeat what my colleague Tom Tugendhat has just said, but let me just make a few comments on some developments in Parliament here in Westminster, and then just talk briefly about my bill and the purpose of it. I think it's true to say that there's hardly a day goes by in Parliament at the moment without some issue to do with China being raised. It's one of the biggest concerns that parliamentarians have. We've had the situation regarding Huawei and the 5G technology contract, where after a lot of pressure, and I have to say I was one of the early warners about not involving Huawei in our telecommunications network, and now Huawei is not going to be a provider to the next generation of telecoms in the UK, which is, I think, good news. It was met with a rather menacing response from the Chinese, saying that there would be consequences for such action. Most recently, there's been some real outrage in the UK Parliament and shared around the world with the revelations about the treatment of the Uyghurs, and what I think many of us would claim amounts to genocide under the UN definition of genocide, and some serious charges to be answered there. And indeed, the Chinese ambassador was challenged on BBC quite firmly yesterday, and found rather wanting in his response. And of course, we've had the situation around Hong Kong, which I'll come back to. We've also had, I think it's right to say, a lot of pressure, quite rightly, on the influence, and the Sikyong alluded to this, the influence that China very subtly but effectively has been posing in United Kingdom boardrooms with a number of high-ranking businessmen and women who have been taking the Chinese shilling. And it was quite interesting that one of the British directors of Huawei, non-executive directors, appeared in front of a parliamentary committee last week, not Tom's committee, but another committee. He claimed quite openly that they were entirely free to express their own opinions as employees of Huawei, and it wouldn't in any way prevent their free speech. He was then asked by the chairman as to what his views were on the recent security laws in Hong Kong, whereupon he refused to answer and said he's just a humble telecoms executive. So they may say that they're not being muzzled, but they most certainly are. I'm also very concerned about the long-standing influence, which seems to be growing, that China's having on university campuses and in our schools through the very insidious Confucius Institute. And many of us are trying to raise the profile of what is going on there and get some form of ban, as we've seen in Canada and in some parts of America as well, because they are the mouthpieces of the Chinese propaganda departments. And in all of this, it is important that we should not lose sight of the ongoing and very long-standing atrocities and repression that still happens in Tibet. And also we shouldn't lose sight of the enormous pressure on Taiwan as well, and China, again, trying to exert its influence in menacing terms. But in terms of Hong Kong, this is, as Tom has said, a clear, close interest to the United Kingdom because of our long-standing relationship with Hong Kong as a former colony. And I think what we are seeing there is very much as the Sikyong described. It is a salami slicing of rights and liberties of the people of Hong Kong. And later on today, we are going to have a statement in the House of Commons by the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, where it's expected that he will suspend the extradition agreement between Britain and Hong Kong, which would be a very significant move, and it follows similar moves by, I think, Australia and Canada, and also being considered by the United States as well. And that is a very tangible move. We also recently announced a global human rights sanction regime as well, including invoking the so-called Magnitsky regulations about clamping down on people from exceedingly questionable regimes who have amassed wealth, which may be coming through London. And the first response to that new legislation was how soon will it include certain Chinese individuals, because at the moment it's been largely aimed at Russians and some Saudi Arabians involved in the recent murder of the journalist as well. But clearly that vehicle can now be used against Chinese officials in future as well. So it was in that context that I reintroduced a couple of weeks ago my Tibet Reciprocal Access Bill, which looks like this. This is something which I actually brought into Parliament last year, initially, after Chris Law, the co-chair of the All Party Tibet Group, and I travelled to Riga to the International Tibet Parliamentarians Conference, and we heard how this legislation had been brought in the United States. It was an extraordinary piece and a powerful piece of legislation with absolute bipartisan support, unanimous support in both the houses of Congress. It was backed by the representatives Jim McGovern and Randy Halgren from the Democrat and Republican parties. And in the Senate, it was backed by Marco Rubio and Tommy Baldwin, and it was signed by the President just before Christmas in 2018. And effectively what this piece of legislation does is to say that if US officials, journalists, human rights monitors, and even tourists are not being afforded access to Tibet, particularly in pursuit of checking on human rights abuses, then reciprocal action will be taken to deny access to, in this case, the United States, by those officials who've been complicit in restricting that access. So what I did was to take that piece of legislation, lock, stock and barrel, get it rewritten by clerks in the House of Commons in the UK to make it suitable for UK legislation, and then reintroduced it as a private member's bill. Now, private members' bills rarely actually become law, but this is a way of getting it absolutely on the radar. And given what's been going on recently, if the government was so minded to take further measures, then there is an oven-ready piece of legislation on which it could be modelled. And it's already, of course, being used in the United States, and we've seen the repercussions of that. So the US government brought sanctions against certain individuals in China, including the Communist Party chief in Xinjiang, for not allowing access to see what human rights abuses were going on there. That went down very badly with China, as a result of which just last week, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, another very senior member of Congress who was a presidential potential candidate before, and Congressman Chris Smith have all been banned by China from visiting China. So it shows that this piece of legislation actually is affecting China, and they are taking it seriously. So I really want to continue pushing on having measures such as this to beef up the considerable measures which the British government have already announced against China, to show them we are absolutely serious. Because we know what China does is to sort of threaten consequences, as they've said, and try and frighten everybody into submission and rolling over. We've seen how that happens in other countries around the world. We've seen how that happens when His Holiness the Dalai Lama comes to the United Kingdom, and various business leaders and councillors around the country are basically told they must not meet the Dalai Lama, or again there will be consequences. Well, the consequences from not abiding by basic human rights, the consequences of not following the codes of conduct that any decent democratic country around the world does, is that we are not going to take it anymore, and we are going to stand up for it, and there will be consequences for Chinese industry and for Chinese officials in their access to Western democracies. So my bill is a humble little bill, just by me, but signed by a collection of cross-party supporters of Tibet from all the major political parties in the UK Parliament. But it's a useful vehicle for continuing to put pressure on the government to say, be brave, be bold. We need to show China that we will not be pushed around like this anymore, and we mean business. And I have been very pleasantly encouraged, as I know Tom has, by just how strong and robust the response from the UK government has been against China, and most particularly in the way it is completely reneging on the terms of the Anglo-Sino-British agreement over Hong Kong, when Hong Kong became part of China again back in 1997. And it's really, really important that we stand up for the people of Hong Kong and their liberties, just as we stand up for the people of Tibet and their liberties, to show that the sins of China will not go unnoticed or unchecked. Thank you, Sonam.
For your input. It's wonderful. You covered so much. I'm sure there's many, many questions that will be arising. But let me introduce our last guest speaker, Professor Kerry Brown. He is an expert on China, and he is the director of Lau China Institute at King's College London in London University. He's a British academic and author of many books on China. He's written many, many books, so I will not quote many of them because we are running short on time. But it is a great pleasure that we have the expertise of Professor Kerry here to make insight feeling about what is going on in China, really looking at the recent developments and the reactions that the world is pouring on China. So can I invite Dr. Kerry to speak?
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me today. So I'm at a British university, but I'm not aware that we're funded by some of the people referred to. We are independent and neutral. Before I sort of say anything, I think it's very important to have a sort of a good level of knowledge, and that is often lacking in the UK. There's one book. It's not one by me. It's by Robbie Barnett, actually. Terry Wasser, a Tibetan writer based in Beijing, actually, remarkably, called Forbidden Memory, Tibet During the Cultural Revolution. I've been reading it over the last couple of days. It's a very powerful pictorial and historical kind of account of a period of Tibetan history from 1966 until 1976, which has never really been accessible before. And some of the images in this book are incredibly powerful and really have helped me understand more about the issues in Tibet. So anyone watching, I'd really encourage them to get hold of this book. It's got a wonderful introduction by Robbie, and then it's really worth reading. So I guess I'll say three things. Something about the geopolitics, something about the opportunity, I suppose, and something about domestic issues in China. On the geopolitics, it's obviously already clear that space is tightening. China has a number of issues, I guess, with America, with Europe, with the UK, with Australia, and it's always been my assumption that China wouldn't want to have arguments on many fronts, and I'm assuming that what we're seeing now is very much unplanned. Maybe because of COVID-19, it's been kind of accelerated. But obviously, you have this kind of clash between, I suppose, China at a period where it's very nationalistic, under a leader who is very aware of this nationalism and the emotions of, China, particularly the middle class. And therefore, it's sort of got a rigidity, which means that it's really hard to sort of avoid these huge clashes with particularly the US, but also in its wake with the UK and Europe. And so I'm assuming that this is going to be the kind of environment that we will be living in for some time. And it means, that these sorts of issues that we've been referred to, Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Tibet, are sort of located in this much more sort of tense position now. I think the space for talking about them in the past was a little bit more. It was never much. I have to say it was never much, but it's certainly become, in some ways almost non-existent. There doesn't seem to be a common language. So that forces decisions, I think, on policymakers in China and here, actually, to be honest. Everyone, I think, has now less options. I guess that means, therefore, the second issue is, what kind of an opportunity is it? Clearly, because of the awareness now of what's been problematic in Xinjiang, the reference yesterday to just now to the interview with the Chinese ambassador Liu Xiaoming with Andrew Ma yesterday, there's a high awareness of the issues happening in Xinjiang, and I suppose that kind of means that there's an awareness of the similar issues in Tibet. The party secretary in Xinjiang was the party secretary in Tibet, and some of the security measures in Tibet, the grid method, these kinds of things have been used in Xinjiang. So there is a kind of link. I guess there's a sort of question about, what benefit does this give to the Tibetan groups as they see this heightened awareness? Of course, it is true that this has kind of been, kind of interesting to politicians and activists across the world. But I think we also have to admit, in my experience in the last 2 years of talking about these issues, sometimes in China, not in Tibet. I haven't been to Tibet since 2001, so long time I haven't been there. But certainly in Beijing, there is no real easy way to talk about this as policy. Even when you talk about it in terms of sort of containment, there's a sort of huge kind of brick wall one comes across. If decoupling, I mean, even if it's sort of fragmented decoupling happens, that means that some of the things that we once assumed were points of maybe pressure over China kind of disappear. There is every possibility that if everything breaks, and there is a fairly comprehensive decoupling, then, you know, there is absolutely no input at all into issues. In Tibet in the past, you know, there were some NGOs active, not in recent years. There was something, and that is pretty much, you know, kind of shriveled. Decoupling will mean that everything, kind of all that influence is gone. I mean, I'm not saying there shouldn't be decoupling, but that is a kind of realistic, I think, assessment of what that would, the consequences of that. So, you know, this is a kind of strategic choice, and people can go one way or the other. Very finally, you know, kind of on the domestic drivers. So I try and always sort of talk realistically about what sort of seems to me to be the thinking in Beijing. And behind it, I think, is this odd process of normalization, normalization in Chinese terms. So you probably know about people, Hu Anggang, the academic at Tsinghua University, Ma Rong, Beijing University. You know, 10 years ago, they were writing about the new ethnic policy and the idea that there should be a standardization almost, that, you know, the idea of 56 ethnic groups, you know, the dominant Han with 92%, and then, you know, other groups like Tibetans in China all having a sort of slightly different status. This was unfair, and it, you know, kind of was not sort of equitable, and therefore they argued strongly, and at the time controversially, for a normalization. Autonomous regions were not to sort of be sustained. It was just an inequality, something that was, you know, sort of no longer necessary because they weren't properly autonomous. They needed to be normal like other provinces. I guess it's interesting under Xi Jinping that there's been a disappearance of ambiguity, which is kind of helpful because it means we no longer, you know, have sort of areas where we can dream and idealize about things. We are presented with a stark reality. The stark reality, I suppose, in Beijing in domestic policy is ethnic minority issues now are absolutely standardly part of a security framework, a domestic policy framework, which has no space for admitting other, you know, kind of ethnic groups. I mean, it's all standardized. And I think that's just a statement. I think that's my assessment of what domestic policy is like in China. It means that issues like Hong Kong, I know that's not an ethnic issue, but that's sort of like a provincial issue, I suppose. Hong Kong is, I think, regarded in Beijing now as a provincial city, you know, provincial place, not a separate place with a sort of different identity. And I think Tibet, Xinjiang, partly in Mongolia, that's a very different issue. You know, kind of they're also being brought into this very standardized framework. So I think those are just some observations about the situation. I mean, not so much about the political issues that others have talked about, but just my understanding of some of the ingredients for this issue within China that might be worth thinking about in this important debate. Thank you very much.
To hear your views, always objective, and you know, you spent a huge amount of time understanding prospects, understanding things, and it's always been very, very useful to hear your view. Thank you so much. And there are so many questions coming left, right, and center. And since I have Tom has a very limited time with us, I want to ask the first question to Tom, please. Tom Tugendhat. Sorry, this is one of the listeners' question. Given Britain's historical relationship with Tibet, it is only right for the UK to help facilitate and urge the Chinese leadership for early resumption of Sino-Tibetan dialogue to help resolve the Tibet issue peacefully. Can Tibetans expect the influence of UK Foreign Affairs Select Committee Chair Mr. Tugendhat to prioritize the Tibet issue to send such a strong message to China as well as to the UK government? Tom, did you hear me? Hello. Do I have Tom or?
I think he's disappeared. I think he's gone. I think. I
Yes.
don't know if Timothy wants to answer it. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Maybe Tom is gone. Maybe Tim, you could answer something on this.
It looks like the Chinese hackers got to the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. Sorry about that. Well,
too much for my equipment in the Westminster.
Quite. Well, I obviously am not a member of the government, nor is Tom. I think, as I mentioned in my comments, what's really important is that with all these other things going on at the moment around Huawei, around Hong Kong, around the Uyghurs, there's a great focus on China and China's record, but this is old hat to those followers of what's been going on in Tibet since 1951, and of course what continues to go on to Taiwan on a different level. And I think the analogy which the Sikyong made is that Hong Kong is Tibet Mark II is actually quite a useful one, because we can see the promises and the obligations to which China supposedly signs up, and then very, very quickly those obligations are diluted and are not worth the paper that they are written on. So I think Tibet will become more useful in a way of illustrating what could well happen to Hong Kong if it follows down the same course. And by the way, we shouldn't forget that Tibet has been suffering and continues to suffer and has lost all these liberties and has done so for many years now, and many Tibetans have lost their lives as a result. So I think Tibet is just part of the bigger problem. And this is an opportunity for us to say, look at Tibet if you want to see what the future of Hong Kong is going to be. And in sorting out the world's approach to Hong Kong, we need to sort out China's approach to Tibet at the same time. So I think it's an advantage to Tibet that it can be grouped together now with Hong Kong.
I have a question again from the viewer to our President Sikyong. Tibet is getting a lot of media attention, especially in India, against the backdrop of the Sino-Indian conflict across the Himalayan border. How can this momentum be turned to Tibet's advantage in terms of getting discussion on Tibet in Indian Parliament to mobilizing public support for Tibet at the grassroots level in India, I think? Sikyong, your mic is not working. Can you Alice? Bhuminda. Sorry.
I think he's been hacked too. So it's just Tim and me. We're see who's the last one standing. I might be the last one standing here.
So that means, can I think Sikyong is back. Can you hear? We can't hear you. Chinese have gone to the Dharamsala. So I think we will let Sikyong's mic work. I want to ask Professor Kerry, you alluded to this somehow, that what has happened after the Wuhan pandemic, the progression that China has come across with Hong Kong, with India borders, and all sorts of American things. This seems, if I'm not wrong, you said it is unplanned. Does it really mean there is problem with the Xi Jinping's authority, or is the internal problem within the Chinese Communist Party is so great that they can't control the peripherals? How do you assess this?
Well, I mean, I think so. The original management of COVID-19 in China, yeah, that was obviously problematic. But I mean, somehow China is now in a sort of stronger position. I mean, as much because the rest of the world has also found this such a challenging problem. And the restoration of growth, I think, is 3%. I think yesterday the announcement shows that China's sort of kind of pulling out of that particular stage without, it seems, reoccurrence of the problem. But I mean, I think the part of the problem is that the dynamics of the Xi leadership are very nationalistic. That's pretty clear because it appeals, I think, to people's sentiments in a lot of China. The second is that it was always going to be a problem when you have China with its distinctive political model being such an important economy too. I mean, there were always going to be issues, and its geography, with India and all of the other countries around it is never easy. So I think what we see at the moment is a bit of a perfect storm. You have a kind of China with its dominant, economic sort of profile. You have a huge problem that's everyone's sharing, a public health problem, and you have a sort of China which is isolated and exceptional. And I mean, so any kind of modeling of that would have been problematic, but the problem is it's coming so quickly and so intensively at the moment. So I don't want to say these problems are inevitable. I mean, they're not inevitable, but they're not, they shouldn't be particularly surprising. Though they, I'm sure, could become even more grave. At the moment, it's not surprising they're so sharp. I think the sound is back for Dr. Sangay now.
Thank you.
Dr. Lobsang Sangay now.
Thank you. President, can you hear me? Yes. Dodo. Yeah.
Thank Kerry, such a person of high profile in the academic field, to be on our panel, and also Tim Loughton for always being there for us Tibetans, and also good to see you. And it's such prestigious, it's such a prestige for Chairman of the Parliamentary Foreign Affairs, Tom Tugendhat, to be there on the panel. So kudos to our Office of Tibet and Sonam Pasila and his staff. Now, regarding the question, it's true. Recently, for almost 35 to 40 days, and I've been on, almost 45 to 47 national televisions and various shows in India because of the incursions of Chinese army to the border of India in the Ladakh area called Galwan Valley. And 20 Indian soldiers were brutally killed, and more than 100 were injured. So it became a big national issue. And then I think the coverage, we got, in the sense, the Tibetan perspective, the Tibetan narrative, was highlighted and covered by every news media and print media. So almost every village in Tibet, in India now, kind of know about Tibet. So, and after 60 years, when the elder generation of Indians knew about Tibet after the invasion, occupation of Tibet, the younger generation of Indians didn't know much about Tibet and as to what's happening. Suddenly they realized the importance of the Tibet as a buffer zone between India and China, as a zone of peace. The border was essentially demilitarized, according to one Tibetan official who wrote a letter to Indian government in 1950s, was, at the moment we have only 75 to 100 security personnel guarding 3,500 kilometers long border between India and Tibet. After the occupation, the Indian government has to pay a huge price. So all this has become a reality. So with this coverage, with this awareness among the Indian population, definitely sympathy and support for Tibet has grown. And many people in India, including a former foreign secretary like Nirupama Rao, has asked for, awarding Bharat Ratna, the highest, award of Indian government, to be given to His Holiness Dalai Lama. And support for, I think, Tibet is very huge. So that way, I think, it's a big dividend. But then, as far as government policy is concerned, it will take some time. But the awareness and sympathy and support among in the Indian population is palpable, which is good for the Tibetan cause in the long run.
In your piece that you talked about the film that Andrew Marr showed to the Chinese embassy yesterday, Sunday morning. What it really comes is we see the thought transformation, the tool that is used by Communist China. That is what is happening in Uyghurs now in these camps, has been going on in the Tibetan Buddhist centers, monasteries for many, many, many decades. And I want to ask, do you think that this could constitute ethnic genocide within the United Nations definition of causing serious body and mental harm to members of a group? Is China repeating the history of Nazi Germany of 1930s and 40s? And what can the British government do, or the liberal democracy can do to guard against this from China's onslaught? Maybe this question for Tim.
Touched on this. Am I muted? Right. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good. I touched on this earlier, and when we had the recent revelations about Uyghurs with the investigation which came up with evidence of effectively forced sterilization, as well as what we knew about these so-called re-education camps, where 1 million or so Uyghurs appear to have been committed to, as well as the instances of torture and everything else. On the forced sterilization alone appeared to come within the terms of the UN definitions of genocide. And I directly raised that with the Foreign Secretary in order to look into this further and to raise it in an international context. I think the revelations that have come out, of which there was no defense by the Chinese ambassador on the BBC yesterday. He casually referred to Western intelligence agencies constantly making stuff up, and I think a rather feeble claim that prisoners get transported by train anywhere, where you saw these satellite photographs of large numbers of Uyghur prisoners bound and blindfolded. They are getting away literally with murder. So yes, I think there are grounds for a proper investigation as to whether they are committing acts which the UN itself would describe as genocide.
Maybe this is for all panels, but I would like to go first to Professor Kerry. China is increasingly and quietly expanding its territory by doing deals in Middle East, countries such as Iran, Sri Lanka, India, and many other countries in Africa, by supposedly doing business deals, providing military and scientific training providing weapons, constructions, etc. This is an extremely urgent threat to the relation of these countries whose naive and unprepared governments are succumbing to. Please comment on any possible solution for stopping this expansion of China, well known to their serious abuse of human rights. Very general, but covers a hell of a lot.
I mean, I think that's an allusion partly to the Belt and Road Initiative, which has been around now for, 5 or 6 years. It depends on the country. I mean, in the Middle East, China is probably not very happy at being dragged into some of the very deep and long-lasting issues there. I mean, it's been strangely able to kind of be fairly neutral in the Middle East. It's maintained good relations with Israel and Iran and Saudi Arabia, despite having these campaigns in China, in Xinjiang and against Saudi sort of like Wahhabi kind of, ideology and all the rest of it. It's been able to manage this balance until now. And many have quite kind of wondered why the Saudi Arabian government, for instance, is not more critical of China because of its treatment of Muslims in the Xinjiang region. So I don't think it's as straightforward as China marching in and just sort of doing what it wants. There's definitely places where it has been very, very active, particularly in the export of Chinese labour, which has caused problems. And there's other places where I think it's kind of really got its fingers bitten. I wonder whether this is where China eventually may well sort of almost not be forced to change, but have to adapt quite a lot. It is now exposed to a lot of quite high-risk, different sort of environments. One of the things about the United States and kind of Europe sort of tightening up a bit towards China is that now it's probably going to be pushed more, like Huawei, for instance, into markets in the Middle East, in Africa, and Latin America. And these are high risk. And China doesn't have a huge amount of experience of working there. It's got some, but not a lot. And I imagine that, therefore, it's going to kind of, just because of that, not because of probably pressure from Europe and America maybe, but maybe the huge problems of working in these highly unstable markets, this will probably expose it to quite a lot of different pressures. So this is not a straightforward story. I'm not saying that China isn't sometimes culpable, but I think it's also in many areas not as dominant as maybe people think it is, and probably exposed to more influence than we might suspect.
President Si-kyung, you comment on this question? We got a double whammy attack.
Is it me? Am I the only one who could be heard now? It's nothing to do with me. I'm not the one. I'm not the one doing it.
Maybe we'll ask Tim to have a comment on this.
I'm still here. If you can hear me, good, right?
Yes.
I agree with the comments Kerry made. I think it's a bit more problematic in the Middle East. Certainly, from my experience, where of course China has had huge influence and bought huge influences on the east coast of Africa in particular, and I visited a number of countries where you see large quantities of Chinese personnel, where you see Chinese hotels, where you see Chinese factories, and you see a lot of infrastructure projects which the Chinese have financed, usually in return for deals to cart off large quantities of metals, ores, in some cases hardwoods and other things back to China as well. And interestingly, I was in Madagascar, I think a couple of years ago, where the Chinese have had quite a lot of influence, and there's some quite interesting questions flying around about a very substantial amount of money which had been spent in the Madagascar presidential election. I think it had been worked out that it had the second highest per capita spend for a presidential election, second only to the United States, and Madagascar is in the bottom half dozen poorest countries in the world. But there have been several infrastructure projects, such as roads and conference centres, which the Chinese had built, only for them to be abandoned and fall apart in many cases, having taken some of the booty in that case and then gone back to China. So I think a number of countries are finding that mortgaging some of your resources and future to China doesn't turn out to be such a whizzy financial deal after all. But which was why I think they're going to find it harder from here on in.
Thank you. Yes. We can't we can't hear you, Sijong. Sijong is definitely hacked. We can't hear you, Sijong.
Perhaps he could mime some answers and we could try and guess at them.
Maybe we could do lip syncing. Tommy, you could maybe sort of say what he's saying. Put your words into your boss's mouth.
Singde.
Oh yeah, now it's okay. Yes.
Okay, now quickly, yeah. The original author,
we have to leave you all alone there.
Okay, with China, you have a choice: competition or cooperation. It started in Washington, D.C. Nixon, Kissinger authored this cooperation model, and they tried for 30 plus years. Now the conclusion, Washington, D.C., not just the defense and the intelligence group, but also in both the parties, including the Treasury and Commerce Secretary, all say competition. So they mentioned, China more than Russia now. Even in Europe now, many countries are realizing this. It's competition, not cooperation. Now in South Asia, particularly in India, with the recent tragic incident, the Indian government, all the China experts who were soft on China before are saying competition, not cooperation. So the Indian government also banned 59 softwares, Chinese softwares now, including TikTok and other, popular software. So a 59 number is good because for us, in 1959, Tibet was occupied and Chinese, Indian government chose 59, Indian softwares to be banned. So even in Asia, the discourse is happening, competition or cooperation. So India has concluded its competition. So I think all over the world, they are realizing. So hence, this is the time for alliance of democracies, which Tim and others are part of it, to come together and say international norms and regulations ought to be respected. And what you promise in Hong Kong, what you promise to Tibetans, ought to be respected and implemented, right? So recently, something unprecedented happened. 50 human rights experts affiliated to UN Human Rights Council issued a press release to investigate, to travel to China, to investigate human rights conditions in China in general and Hong Kong and Tibet in particular. This is unprecedented for human rights experts affiliated to UN to issue such kind of statement. So these are all growing voices that China is coming out with different ideology, different international norms. They want to restructure United Nations in their favor. They want to redefine human rights, in their favor. So this is a growing realization. So hence, Tibet issue is important because we are the first victim, or we are the first experience. Till now, we were always seen as an exception. Or what happened to Tibet is an exception. Perhaps we can do business deals with China. We can have good relationship with China. Now with what's happening in Xinjiang and Hong Kong, these are all validation of what Tibetans have been saying for the last 60 years. So we have been the torchbearer of human rights and democracy as far as China is concerned. Finally, we are being validated, unfortunately, with tragedy in Xinjiang and the crisis in Hong Kong.
Thank you, Dr. Sengay. I got about 8 to 9 minutes left, and I have two important questions that I would like to ask for all of you to give as short answer as possible. The question is this: with the failure of one country, two system in Hong Kong, what is the position of the demand for high autonomy, genuine autonomy that Tibetans still pursue? How do you see, Dr. Sengay?
It's for me? Yes, okay.
Yes.
As far as we are concerned, it was His Holiness' vision, and the Tibetan Parliament passed that our policy is middle way approach. We want to solve the issue of Tibet through dialogue. Non-violence is the principle that we follow. So as long as you pursue non-violence, then you have to talk. When you talk, you must come to a common ground, and that's middle way. That's to, Chinese government says sovereignty and territorial integrity cannot be compromised. And if that's the case, we say repression of Tibetan people should end, and we should be granted, genuine autonomy. So middle way continues to be our policy.
Thank you. Thank you. And can I ask one question to Tim? Tim, with regards to the Tibet Access Bill, you have been a member of the new International Parliamentarian Group on Tibet, on China. Do you think there will be some influence from your colleagues from other countries who could support such a bill in their own countries?
Simple answer is yes. So this IPAC group, which has been set up on the back of recent happenings in China, is a great way of parliamentarians from many other democracies working together, which is the only way we are going to really put sufficient pressure on China to show that this isn't an isolated form of outrage from a small group of UK parliamentarians or a few senators in America. This is some serious outrage by many parliamentarians across many countries, democratic countries around the world. So I picked up what had happened with the bill in Congress and adapted it for the UK. There is absolutely no reason that any other country cannot do the same and impress upon their governments to try and get this into legislation in just the same way as the so-called Magnitsky legislation, which we've now adopted, which they've adopted in the United States and France and many other countries now, means that those countries become no-go areas for those people guilty of criminal activity, of human rights abuses from China and any other countries. It makes it much, much harder for them to be able to travel and to move their assets and other things around freely. So the more countries that follow the example of the States, and now what I'm trying to do here, then the stronger a cause it becomes and the more pressure it puts on China.
Thank you. Thank you. And this question I have initially for Dr. Kerry. It's quite an academic question. United Nations Assembly resolution we have on Tibet in 1961 declares solemnly renewed its call for the cessation of the practice which deprived the Tibetan people of their fundamental human rights and their right to self-determination. United Nations also has defined that the fundamental right to self-determination is a core requisite for decolonization. Do you envisage a route to pressure China to decolonize Tibet, East Turkestan, Southern Mongolia as part of a global Britain's ethnic foreign policy?
Right. Okay.
Well, you've got 3 minutes.
Is that the time? Is that the time? I think we're out of time. I have to say that vision is probably not. I mean, the UN route is not, I think, likely. I think from what was earlier said about autonomy, genuinely autonomy, I guess what is more likely is, as the sort of central government in China deals with all these complex problems, will pure self-interest and pragmatism push it to make changes to its governance elsewhere. You know, I know that sounds kind of a bit wobbly, but the thing is that, you know, its priority is to maintain its, you know, kind of monopoly on power, and it is willing to compromise things on that. At the moment, it isn't, but we may kind of be coming into a situation, you know, more quickly perhaps than we suspect, where it is struck by so many different challenges that it will compromise. So while today things look, you know, pretty dim and grim and terrible for any sort of governance changes, I wouldn't remotely say that that is going to be the position for ever. I mean, it's not going to be the position probably for even the medium-term future. We're moving into a decade in China where there are going to have to be some fundamental changes. They will not be the changes I imagine that we are envisaging, but they will be changes. And, you know, maybe some of these governance issues of the autonomous regions and all of the other kind of provinces in China will become more flexible, even though it looks not good today, because a government can only deal with so many things at one time. And this government is dealing like with floods, with COVID, with all sorts of issues at the moment. So it may be flexible more than we suspect. I just hope to be optimistic about this. You know, we have to be hopeful. Thank you.
Do you think a process of decolonization could be looked at by the UK government? Because there might be a room for...
I think this is where my computer gets hacked into and I suddenly disappear.
Okay.
I think that's a tough question. We have to come back to it next time.
Yes. So I think... Brother Sikyo, you want to say something? Maybe we got...
Yes, I think I just want to thank Tim and Kerry and Tom for being on the panel. And I've appeared on so many webinars and so many national television live, you know, right here from this, you know, room, but for the first time, so many technical glitches. So clearly, so I think, Tim, what you're doing is so important. Kerry, I think you, the panelists, you know, given the importance there, I think doing something fishy today, yeah. So really, Sonam Faisal, I want to congratulate you and for organizing this, and hope to see you all in London soon. So I'm sure the, you know, one thing about the coronavirus and lockdown, Chinese government, you know, could be hoping that because of this lockdown, you can't travel around, and Tibetan voices and supporters and friends could be shut down. But through this webinar, we are sending a strong message to Beijing. Not so. We will be active, and we will march on to pursue a justice, to pursue a freedom, and to pursue a truth. So that way, you know, that's why I think friends like you are so important. So be with us, remain with us. We'll march forward together to Lhasa with a visa of Tibetan government soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we have maybe a minute left. I want to say thank you so much for Sikyong, President of CTA, for giving your time, and the team for organizing everything all the time for us. And Kerry, you had been very good advisor for us. You know, you study China quite a lot. You are, I would say, so with so much knowledge that is always useful, not all the time, but always useful. And I want to say, Tom is already gone, but I really want to say a special thank you for Tom for making his time with us because it is very important that he hears our president as part of this webinar. Maybe a bit like a hearing for him, so he gets more acquainted with our situation. So with this, I want to say thanks to my team in the Office of Tibet here, and we will say goodbye to everybody. Have a nice day. Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, team.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Recording has stopped.